about 2 more minutes just for everyone to get logged in, and then we'll get started. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Leanne Coppin. I'm a customer advocate with SWK, and I'll be moderating today. We are going to review year-end processing for stage 100 and W-2 processing, just to make sure you're in the right place. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. We do have a pretty full house today, so we're going to place everyone on mute. If you have a question come up during the presentation, please type it into the questions pane of the control panel, or use the chat box on the control panel. Those will both work, and we'll either answer you within the app or we'll discuss the questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording these sessions, and we will email you a link to the recording and the related handouts within about 1 week. We have to give a little time to convert the files. So with that, I will now pass things over to our presenter, Ryan Whipple, and he will kick us off today.
Thanks, Leanne.
Ryan, over to you.
Thanks. Let me go and have it show my screen. Okay, so like Leanne said, today we're going to go through the year-end closing processes, just kind of a refresher since it's been a long time since you would have had to do year-end closing. Also gives you a good opportunity to have kind of a basic checklist of things you should go through so you can look through those and kind of be reminded of the things you should do when you're doing your year-end closing. So the first thing that we'll talk about is your backups. Year-end is a great time to test your backups that you are having your IT company do for you. Your nightly, ideally full backups of your Mass 90 folder. So we usually recommend that you contact your IT and have them try to restore a few files from there. Make sure that it's working, because we have had many clients who the system said that the backups were working, but once they actually needed them, they were corrupt or somehow damaged, and they weren't able to get the data that they needed. Ended up, losing a lot of information and spent a lot of man hours cleaning that up. And also, before you do any year-end closings, we usually recommend that you make a copy of your company inside of Sage 100. That way you just have that extra level of protection. You can go into that backup company and print any reports that you need to. It's kind of a snapshot of where you were at the end of the year. And if you need to move on and keep processing the next year's payroll, well, then you'll be able to use that backup company to print any of those year-end payroll reports like W-2s or 941s, things like that. So we'll start off looking at how you do that. That is done in the Library Master module under the Main folder and in Company Maintenance. So in Company Maintenance, you would open up either an existing company that you want to copy over the top of, or you would create a new company. So let's say I wanted to copy into B16. You would go ahead and type in that new company code, and then you'd put in your company name, the address information, all of that. Once you have that information in, over here on the right-hand side, we have a copy button. So you push that. It's going to give you a few warnings before it takes you to the next window. This first warning is basically telling you that if you don't pick all of the modules that are in your company, since many of the modules are integrated and related together, you might either have inconsistent information or you could get errors because that other module doesn't exist. So you need to consider that when you're making your backup. If you have the space on your server and your company's not too large, it's usually a good idea to have a copy of the full company. That way you have all of your information if you never needed to go back for it. But otherwise, a lot of people, they may end up just copying their payroll their payroll module and like general ledger. So we'll tell OK at this warning. This next warning is because this is a brand new company and it's telling us that we have to save the company before we can copy it. So we're just telling it yes, so it'll save. So now this copy data window will come up, and this is where we can pick what company that we want to copy from. And this is where it's important to pay attention to these fields here, that we have our source company and our destination company, because this is where you can catch yourself if you're about to copy the wrong direction and copy a test company or an old backup company over the top of your live. We usually have a couple clients that accidentally do that throughout the year. So yeah, be very careful when you're in here copying. So we're going to go ahead and grab our live company, which for today is Y16. It then automatically lists for you all of the modules that you have in Y16, and you can select any of those that you want, or if you didn't want all of them, you could unselect and just pick one. So whenever you pick one module, it's going to automatically select General Ledger and Common Information. Those are required modules in every company. But I'm going to go ahead and just select all of them and tell it to proceed, and gives you one last chance to make sure you really want to do the copy. So I'll tell that yes. And when you are making your year-end backup, it's important that you have all of your users out of Sage, or at least out of that company that you're copying. That ensures that you get the most accurate copy of your data, and that you won't have any partially entered orders or different things like that. Once it's done copying, it takes you back to this screen here where we see our B16 company. It has all of the modules listed there for us. And now if we needed to, we would be able to come down here at the bottom and change our company and look at any transactions there. So now that we have a good backup of your company, we can start looking at closing the modules. And one important thing to consider when you're closing is the order or sequence that you close those modules in. And in our handout, we have a list of the order that they should be closed in. But the general reason that there is an order that they're closed in is because these modules are related and they pass information back and forth. So for example, the sales order module, it's used to post information to inventory and accounts receivable and to the general ledger. So before you would close inventory or AR or any of those modules, you would want to make sure that you have everything completed in your sales order module. So that's where you go through and make sure you have everything posted and updated in the sales order module, and then close that module before you would move on and close inventory, AR, and so on. So basically follow through the list that we have attached, and then that'll make sure that you close them in a proper order and you don't have any issues with not finishing up the right transactions. So the first module that we'll start talking about is the purchase order module. So there's a few things that you want to do before you do your purchase order closing. The first thing is to make sure that you've printed your purchases clearing report. And in the PO module, under period end, that's where you find your purchases clearing report. And when you run that report, you usually want to run it just for inventory items. And basically this report will list for you any purchase orders that you may have received goods on, but you haven't been invoiced from your vendor yet. And when you do those receipts, it posts to a purchases clearing GL account. So you then run this report and compare it to that general ledger account to make sure you're in balance, to make sure there hasn't been either some kind of error in posting or users posting journal entries to the wrong accounts. Um, there's lots of different ways that it can get off. But this report is always active as of right now. So that's why it's important to run that if you're going to try to balance at the end of the month, that you always run this report right at the end of the month. If you run it a week later and people have started processing transactions for the next month, then basically it's going to be as of that point in time. So you wouldn't be able to balance for that month-end date. Another good step to take is to review your open purchase order report for accuracy. So that's found under the reports folder in PO, and it's this first one, open purchase order report. So frequently we have clients that they don't review this. Basically they go on creating their purchase orders and receiving goods and never really check back. And if there was a breakdown in procedures or maybe some turnover and people weren't doing all of the tasks that they should, you might end up with really old purchase orders sitting out here that were never received properly or never invoiced, and it just basically leaves a mess in your accounting system. So you want to come in here, look at the POs that you have on here that are still listed as open, make sure that it makes sense and that you're aware that they're still open, and that you don't have any mistakes sitting out here that really should have been closed. And what determines for a purchase order that it has a closed or completed status, it is based on here the quantity received on the purchase order, the quantity invoiced, and then the quantity back ordered. So you need to have your quantity received and your quantity invoiced have to match for all of the lines, and then the quantities back ordered all have to be 0. Now that could be that you've actually received the full amount from the PO line, or it could be that you received part of it, but then you talk to your vendor and they're not going to be able to fulfill the whole purchase order, so you may have gone into purchase order entry and zeroed out the back ordered quantity. That will still result in your purchase order changing to a status of complete, like you want. And that's one more good thing I should have done when I ran that report, is you can tell it what type of purchase orders you want to include. So you can go ahead and uncheck the completed purchase orders so that your list is a lot smaller. It's also a good idea at the end of the month to reconcile your prepaid purchases or your vendor deposits account. You can look at the deposits on that open purchase order report and make sure that those are matching up with what you're seeing in your deposits GL account for your vendors, and just make sure that nothing was missed and that everything has been processed properly. And then once you've gone through all of those steps, then that's when you would come down to the period end menu and you would actually pick your period end processing. And you'll find that these period end processings are pretty similar across all the different modules. You basically come in there and select that. It will show you what period that it's going to end up closing, and then you tell it proceed. And it'll go through and close the module, calculate different history or summary options, and maybe purge old history. We're not going to actually go through and run that right now. So that is the purchase order module. The next module we would want to do would be the sales order module. It's obviously still related to inventory, so it has a lot of the same considerations that you would have with your purchase order module. You'd want to go to the reports folder and run your open sales order report. Same concept here. You're looking for old sales orders that maybe should have been closed and fully invoiced, but that step wasn't done. Maybe somebody just hand wrote an invoice or did an invoice in AR instead of through sales order. But basically review, look for old transactions, make sure it's generally including the things you're expecting. And same thing, you also have customer deposits. You can review those deposits on the open sales order report and make sure that everything looks correct there as well. And then when you're done with those, under the period end menu, you can run your period end processing. In the inventory module, it's a good idea to do a physical count. You don't necessarily have to do your physical count right at the end of the year, but we do obviously recommend that you do a physical count at some point during the year. We have many clients who get to a point where they haven't done a physical count in several years, and so their inventory just gets to be further and further off. So year end is a good time to do it, or if that's a really busy time for your business, then make sure you pick some time and do your physical count. You can even break up your physical count into smaller chunks of inventory items and basically count part of your inventory once a month or once a quarter, just to make it not so monumental of a task. But when you do your physical count, you'll want to make sure that all of your sales order invoices and your purchase order receipts have been updated. That way, all of those quantities will have been reflected in your inventory items. So when people go and count in your warehouse, they're going to come up with the same quantities. Otherwise, you're going to end up with discrepancies, and after your count, your quantities are still going to be off. If you are using LIFO, FIFO, lot, or serial as your valuation method, then when you're doing period end processing, it's a good time to run your inventory negative tier report and the inventory negative tier adjustment. So your inventory negative tier, this is going to list for you any of those FIFO or LIFO costing tiers where your inventory quantities went negative. Sage 100 allows you to sell the inventory even if you don't have the quantity on hand available. It's to allow you to basically process an order and get the invoice out the door, even if you haven't necessarily received the goods from your vendor yet. A lot of businesses process their orders that way. So this first report, the inventory negative tier report, it gives you a list of all of the tier quantities, basically all of the items that have gone negative. So you can review through that list, make sure that those are things you're aware of, that you know they're valid. I sold these items before I have received the goods for them, and I knew that I was doing that. Or this is a complete mistake. Somebody must have picked the wrong inventory item, something like that. And if those are the situations you have, then obviously you need to go back to those invoices and reverse them and re-invoice them with the correct inventory items. But once you have gone through and reviewed those, make sure that they all seem correct, dealt with any mistakes, then you run your inventory negative tier adjustment. So what this report will do, it will go and look at all of those negative or over-distributed costing tiers, and it will check to see if you have received any goods or basically positive inventory into your system since it was over-distributed. So in this case here, this item, we had negative 8 over-distributed, and since then we've received more, so it will go and basically offset those against each other and basically net them out and get rid of that negative 8 over-distributed costing tier. Now, if there had been a difference in the cost between the two, it would post an adjustment to your general ledger for that difference. In our situation here, they happen to both have the same cost, so there's no adjustment that it ends up making. But it's important to actually run this report, because after you run it, it's going to ask you if you want to make those adjustments. I also frequently have clients that come in here and they just run the tier report or maybe even the adjustment, but they never tell it yes that they want it to update. So the list just gets longer and longer month after month. So make sure that you actually update it. There's a couple reports that you'll want to run at the end of the month. We have the inventory trial balance report. I can never find them when I want to find them. There it is. I always expect it to be way higher in the list. So this is the report that you would run to balance your inventory to the general ledger. Here in this situation, I just ran it for the entire inventory. If you have different inventory GL accounts by product line or something like that, you may have to run it for one product line or a group of product lines at a time. But this is the report that's designed to balance to the GL. So this is the one that you should be using when you are reconciling at the end of the month. Another good report to run is your inventory valuation report. So this report will go and list for you your individual costing tiers that you have in each of your warehouses so that you can see if there's one of them that all of these are $34 and all of a sudden I have one that's $200. So you can review it and look for any kind of anomalies like that. And the last one is your inventory stock status report. So this report will show you for each of your warehouses, what quantities do you have on hand, how many do you have committed to purchase orders or sales orders, basically calculates an available quantity for you, and also shows you your reorder point to kind of give you an idea if you need to be ordering more of any items. So once you've finished running all of those, again, you'd go down to your period end menu and you'd run your period end processing. One thing I guess I'll show, you also, in each of these modules, have your period end report selection. So you can come in to here and you can pick any reports from inventory. Let's say you want the trial balance report, and you can pick a report setting and pick how many copies you want. So you can basically come in here and define a list of reports that you want it to run, and then when you go to actually run your period end processing, if you have this checked, it will go and print all of those reports for you all at once. So some people really like that because it handles all of them all at once. Some people don't like it because they don't have as much control over the individual options on each of the reports. So some people still like to run the reports one at a time and review them and make sure that they're all correct before they update. Because if you just do it this way, you get a copy of the report, but it also updates and closes the module at the same time. So next we'll go through a few payroll tips. So these are just some tips about payroll and about closing the quarter or the year in payroll. Further on, we will go through the W-2 printing in more detail. So don't worry, we will get to that. We're just not going to do it right now. So payroll, it only maintains 1 year of payroll at a time. So if you have your payroll company right now with its 2016 information in it, when you do your year-end closing for your company, it will actually remove all of the 2016 totals and checks that you would see in employee maintenance. All of that information gets purged out. So that is the other reason that it's important to make a backup copy of the company, so that even if you're just wanting to look up some information, you'll have some place to go that's not looking at archived copies of printed reports. You also need to remember that the tax tables for payroll, that they are system-wide. They aren't specific to one company. So even if you do make a backup copy of your company with the 2016 data, once you install the 2017 tax tables, it will basically overwrite, and all of your companies will now be using the 2017 tax tables. And the reason that's important is some of the tax reports, like W-2s, different reports you might print at the end of the year, they're affected by those tax tables, mostly by the FICA limit that you have in there. So by changing that FICA limit to the new 2017 amount, it actually changes the results that those reports will give you. So it's important to make sure that you have the right tax tables, or at least the right FICA limit set in your system before you would run any W-2s or year-end reports that you're going to be submitting to the government. The company name that defaults when you go to start your W-2 printing, that comes from your company maintenance. So in your backup company, that may mean that it's going to default to an incorrect name, but I'll show you where you can change that name when you go to run your W-2 reports. Some of the standard reports, though, that you'd be getting out of payroll here, those would still be showing whatever, in this case, 2016 year-end company. So some people like to put their actual company name in the backup company until they're finished with their year-end reports, but that's kind of a personal preference for you guys. We have a bullet point there. Remember, don't load the 2017 tax tables until you're completely finished with your 2016 payroll. Frequently, we have people forget about year-end bonuses, so make sure that you have all of those processed before you go and install the new tax tables. So obviously, many companies, they can't get all of their W-2s done and printed before that first payroll in 2017. So we have a section there in the handout that walks you through the steps to basically back up your company and install the 2017 tax tables, and then put back in the old FICA limit. And I'll show you where you would put in that previous FICA limit. Under the Setup folder in Payroll, you have your tax table maintenance. And from here you can put in any of the state codes, or if you're wanting your federal tax information, then you can put in Fed. So this is where you have all your GL accounts and your different tax rates and limits defined. So after you have made a backup copy of your company and you have installed your 2017 tax tables, when you're ready to run your W-2s or any other year-end reports for 2016 in that backup company, you would want to come here to the tax table maintenance and change what that limit is here back to the 2016 amount, which is, in this case, $118,500. So then you would run your W-2s, your year-end reports. When you're ready to run more payrolls for 2017 back in your live company, then you would come back here again and put back in the 2017 FICA limit. And depending on how long it takes you to run your W-2s, you might have to do that several times as you're going back and forth. It just kind of depends on the size of your company and whether you're able to do that all in one sitting or whether you're spreading that work out across the month. Some other things that you should look for when you're doing, before you do your year end, is in your payroll options, you want to make sure that you have your perpetual payroll history option turned on. I would expect that all of you would have it turned on. It's a normal thing to really be using, but it's here under your payroll options under the main tab, and it's retain perpetual payroll history. So that's important for any ACA reporting that Sage is going to do, but it's also important for custom payroll reports. If you've ever had us create one or created one yourself for payroll, those are the tables that are usually used. So really, I recommend it be turned on for everybody. I don't think there's any reason to have it not turned on. We also have a list there of different reports that you should print at the end of the quarter or end of the year. Your quarterly tax report, your payroll check history report, your quarterly pay period recap, earnings report, deduction report, your benefit accrual report, workers' comp report, quarterly governmental, quarterly 941, and your W-2s. And once you have all those reports printed, you want to make sure that you reconcile all your quarter-to-date and year-to-date totals on those reports. Make sure they match and agree. You can also run your employee totals verification report. That report will look at the check history detail for your employees and compare it to the summary numbers that have been saved in the system. And it will let you know if there's any discrepancies between the two. And then finally, you would do your federal and state e-filing and run any state-specific reports or your W-2s and 941 forms from there. And we'll get into that in a little while later in the presentation. So the next module we'll talk about is the accounts receivable module. This may not apply to all companies, but before you do your month end, you want to make sure that you've processed any finance charges that you may charge your customers and that you've printed and mailed out all of your statements for your customers. You also want to verify in your setup options that you have what your retain paid invoices option is set to. So in the AR module, under the setup folder, in your accounts receivable options, on the additional tab here at the top left, we have the days to retain paid invoices. So this is in days, not months or years, and the maximum is 999 days. So what that affects is in your customer maintenance, here on the Invoices tab, once these invoices have been fully paid, let me just make that a little bigger, so we have a balance of 0, they will stay on this list for, in my situation, 999 days after they were paid. So some people don't want them to show up too long or that long because it will, if they process a lot of invoices, you know, thousands of invoices, it just makes the list too long and it slows down the system. So they may not want 999 days. Other people don't have that issue and they really want to see as much history as possible. But the important reason to review that setting is that you have, when you do your month end or your year end processing, it goes through and compares against that 999 days, and it will actually purge out the oldest um, history. So we've had several clients who, through turnover, basically they've stopped doing month-end closing in accounts receivable, but they eventually have somebody come on staff or have one of us come out and do training, and we teach them how to do their year-end or their month-end processing, and they go and close a bunch of months all at once to get caught up. But if you don't check that setting first, then all of a sudden you may have a bunch of history get purged out of there, and maybe you only had it set to 30 days, and so now you have several years worth of history that you could have been keeping that's now all gone. So you really want to be careful and watch out for that. So there are a few reports that you should also run. First one being your AR trial balance report. And this is the report that is designed to balance to your general ledger. General rule of thumb in Sage, if it says trial balance on it, that's the report that should balance to the GL. I know many clients want to use their aged invoice report to balance to the GL, but the issue is that the AR trial balance report, it looks at the transaction date or the date that that invoice was actually updated to your general ledger, and that's what it uses when you are telling it, I want everything as of the end of November. Whereas the aged invoice report, it looks at the invoice date, and your users, they could easily have an invoice that they date in November, but they post it to December for the GL, or vice versa. They could have an invoice dated in December, but post it to the GL in November. And I probably get a couple calls a month for clients that are trying to use their aged invoice report to balance to the GL, and it's not balancing. So if possible, you can save yourself a lot of headaches by using the trial balance report to balance to the GL instead. So run that report. You would also want to run your aged invoice report, your cash receipt report, your salesperson commission report, monthly sales report, and your sales tax report. And once you have all of those printed and reconciled, made sure everything's right, that's when you'd move on to your period end, to the period end menu, and actually run your period end processing. So that's accounts receivable. Next we'll do accounts payable. So again, before you close the year, you want to make sure that you have your 1099s printed. Accounts payable has a similar option to the one we just discussed in accounts receivable about customer payments. This one is your paid invoices, so it's the same concept, the invoices that are showing on the vendor. And again, this one has a maximum of 999 days. So make sure you check that, especially if you are behind on doing your month-end closings. You're going to be closing several months back to back. You want to make sure you have that set correctly. After you have that all set, you want to make sure that you have printed your AP trial balance. Again, that's the one that you balance to your GL with, your aged invoice report, your check history report, and your Form 1099 e-filing. So that's basically your 1099 forms. And we'll be, again, going through those later on in the webinar, and we'll go through and walk through that whole process. So that's the AP module. And next one is our general ledger. So basically we've moved through all of the different modules, and then GL is the last module that you would close. So before you close your GL, make sure that you've posted any transactions in any other modules that might affect the month that you're trying to close. Basically make sure all of that stuff is cleaned up. In the setup folder, under General Ledger Options, we have here the number of years to retain General Ledger history. So you'll want to check that before you do any year-end processing in the GL, because when it does year-end processing, it will take that oldest year of history and it will purge that out. And your maximum that you can set it to is 99 years. So if you really want to just keep all of your history, you can change that there as well. In the setups here, there's a few other things you want to check. Under the budget tab, you want to check this copy actual to default budget at year end. Most people don't want that on. Basically what it does is it takes your actual GL amounts from 2016 and it will copy it into the 2017 budget for whichever of your budgets is marked as a default. So some people like to have that as basically a starting point for setting up their budgets. But if you had already started creating your 2017 budgets, this would basically copy and overwrite those budget amounts, and there's really not any way of getting that information back. So it's important that you check that setting and be aware of how you have it set before you run your year-end processing. Under the Entry tab, there are some settings here to reset journal numbers and reset register numbers during year-end. So you can have those never reset, reset every period end, or only reset at year-end. So there are some companies using Sage 100 that they're processing so many journal entries frequently imported from another system that they start to run out of register or journal entry numbers. So this option is out here so that they can reset and basically start each year back at number 1. But it does make it more confusing when you're trying to look up history for a journal entry number. So unless you really have a situation like that, we really recommend that you have it set to never reset. And then obviously if you did run out of numbers in the future, we could reset it then. But for the most part, it's not needed for most companies. The other thing to be aware of is many companies get in the habit of keeping their general ledger open forever and really never doing year-end or period-end processing in the general ledger. They kind of get in that mode of always waiting for some adjustment that their CPA is going to be giving them. And that can actually have problems, cause problems in your system if you get more than 1 or 2 years left open. So we really recommend that you have those closed out or not more than the current year and prior year open. Because what can happen is when you do year-end processing, that's when it rolls forward beginning balances in your GL accounts. So you can start to have issues with your retained earnings or beginning balances on different accounts, and can really just make your GL and your reports look really wrong. And it's also possible to reopen a period. So let's say I'm here working in 2010 period 5, but I have received a journal entry from my CPA that they want me to make back to April of 2010. So I can open up my general ledger options here. I can change it back to period 4 and accept. Then I could come in and make the journal entry, post and update that journal entry. But then the important thing to move it back forward, you never go in your general ledger options and move the date forward. You would come to your period end menu and you would do a period end processing for each month to move that forward. So now I did period end processing and it changes me back to period 5. So you can do the same thing across years. So I could have moved it back to period 12 of a prior year. And basically, however far back you move it, you just go and do period end processing for each individual month until you're back at your current time period. So you can use this, and you could close the month each and every month, or right at the end of the month. And it can assist in preventing users from accidentally posting to closed periods and periods that have been in the past, and can actually save you from some headaches from user errors that way. So before you do your year end, just a couple reports you'll want to make sure that you run. You want to make sure you run your trial balance report, your general ledger detail report, and any financial statements. So if you're using the standard financial statements in Sage, you would print those or print any reports that you need to from whatever financial report writing software you might use. So that is basically all the steps you'd want to go through for closing the different modules. Now we'll go ahead and take a look at the W-2 and 1099 printing, and we will go through those in detail. The W-2 and 1099 printing, it now must be completed through the e-filing sections in Payroll and AP. So in the period end menu in Payroll, you have federal e-filing and state e-filing. And both of those kind of take you to the same place. You can hit the radio button here to really switch between them. But from here in the federal e-filing, you can pick all of these different reports that you may want to run. And basically, this whole system is because Sage has partnered with a third-party company named Atrix. And basically, they're the ones, it's their software that actually generates all of these reports. They maintain them and make sure that they are compliant with the government and all of that. And basically, you can print them for free, either onto plain paper, or you may need to purchase special paper depending on the requirements, and then you can mail those in yourself. Or if you would like, you can basically register as a customer with Atrix, and you can pay them to submit forms for you. And we'll see some of their the features that they have on that and the prices for that as we go through the W-2s. But I'm finding more and more that it makes sense for clients, especially for W-2s and 1099s. They have an option where they will actually print the W-2s for you, they will mail them out to your employees for you, and they will electronically file with the government for you, all for I think around $2 an employee. So for most people, it makes a lot of sense with the cost of all of the forms that you'd have to buy and the man hours for printing them and stuffing those envelopes and mailing them out. For the most clients, it ends up really not costing much more than you're actually spending already. So I really would recommend going that route and saving yourself from the headache for that. So basically over here it has a list of all the different reports, and different reports apply to certain types of businesses, so these may not all really relate to you. But if you come down here, we can come down and find the W-2. Now here it still says 2015, and we are going to see warning messages about that. But basically, because it hasn't gotten to the end of the year yet, the 2016 W-2 form hasn't been finalized, and so it won't be available quite yet. So once you've picked your form, down here you can adjust your company information. So this information will default in from your company maintenance in Library Master module, but you can adjust, put in your correct company name if you need to, all of that information. Once you have your options set, then you can hit accept. And after you have accepted your form, the system will go and communicate with the Sage servers, and it will check your registration with Sage, and it will make sure that you're current on your maintenance with Sage. If your maintenance has lapsed or you are on too old of a version, you will not be able to use the e-filing sections to print W-2s or 1099s. It will then also communicate with the Atrix servers to find out if there have been any updated forms since the last time that you ran a report. And if you're running reports monthly or quarterly, then you may find that pretty much every time you go to launch a report that it's going to tell you that there's updates. So when there are updates, it pops up a window asking you how you would like to download those updates. The best way is the first option on that window. It's for an automatic update. Basically, that will just go out to Atrix servers. It'll download the updates, install those new forms, and then you'll be on your way. Occasionally, clients will get errors when they try to do an automatic update. Probably about 90–95% of the time, those are related to the network security or the security on the workstation that you're working on. So you can work around that by having your IT person come and log on to your workstation as a network administrator and then log into Sage and launch the automatic update. And then that will basically download the new forms, and then you can have your IT person log off and you can go back to running your reports. But once you have those all updated, oh, and the other thing to point out about the form updates is that it's not checking just the one form that you're trying to print. It's comparing all of the federal reports, all of those individual state reports. So that is the other reason that almost every time there is an automatic update, because there's so many different forms that could have possibly had some change made to them. So that's kind of why you'll see that almost every time. So this is just a message about how they're going to start storing the company information. They're going to be saving it specific for the form, and then you can go through a special edit section later on. So when you go to run your W-2s, it basically walks you through a wizard process where it asks you a bunch of questions about your company, what type of 941 filer you are, lots of different questions. So far with most clients, the answer that it defaults to is the correct answer for most people, but still look through them and read them closely and make sure that that is the case for you if this is your first time running your W-2s through here. This first question is asking whether we want to do a test run for your W-2s or whether you want to go through and start processing them for real. So you could go through and actually do a test run with just, in the first option there, 25 employees and kind of get a feel for how this W-2 processing works so that you can get comfortable with it before you're having to use it for real next month. So I really recommend going out there, even if you have to use the 2015 W-2 form. For the most part, it's going to be, the process is going to be the same, so it'll be really beneficial for you and kind of put your mind at ease that once you've been able to try it out and do it once yourself. But I'm going to tell it no thanks and just start processing my W-2s. It's going to tell me my company federal ID number. Then this is my opportunity to change and set the company information. It pulled this information from that first screen where we launched the report. But down at the bottom, you can also add in contact information. So after you've submitted the forms, if there's any problems, so that they can either mail or email you any issues that they may have found with your forms. It's going to ask you if you're filing for your company or if you are a third-party tax preparer. So we're just going to say I'm filing for my company. It's going to show you the states that you have employees in and your tax account numbers for those states. And if there was an issue with any of those numbers, you would be able to select it and edit and change that tax account number. It's going to ask you some questions about your data. Do you have any employees exempt from Medicare? Any employees with Social Security tips? Do you want to use control numbers? Or do you have any employees who elected to receive W-2s electronically? So go through and answer those questions. Here's where you can enter a control number, mark what type or kind of payer you are, basically fill out all these different informations about your company. So those will be specific to you. Each company may be different, but most people are like this. Then it's going to ask if you are a single payer. Basically, do you have multiple companies using the same tax ID number that you're paying people out of? I haven't really run into that situation with a client, so I've always just answered no on that. I don't really know why somebody would process it that way, but for most people, I would just say no. So then once we've answered all the questions, it starts compiling the history on your employees and creating summary amounts for them all. And then it brings us to this window. And this is basically what also the 1099 printing works like. It presents a window with you with a grid and columns of information specific to your 1099s. But here over on the left-hand side, we have employee information, like their address information, social security number, all of that type of stuff. And on the right-hand side, this is where we have all of their wage information, the taxes that may have been withheld, all of that. So you can, as you see, grab this center bar and drag it back and forth as you need to make it easier to see. So what you would do is you would come through here and review this information, make sure that it's correct. If you think that you have it right, then you can hit these next step buttons. And basically what it does is this first step, it verifies your employee information. And that's why these columns are highlighted in blue. And if there were any issues, then it would basically give you an error like this. So I intentionally went and messed up some of the employee information so that we would get this error. So if you had a really long list, you could actually print the list and then go back into employee maintenance in Sage and fix them all. But if you make the change in employee maintenance in Sage, it's not going to automatically update what you have here in Atrix. So you would actually have to start the process over, answer all of those same wizard questions, and then it would fill in the correct information. Or you can tell it to go back and correct. It will highlight for you in red the fields that are having problems, and you can basically correct those. So I'll just put something in for that address line. And here you can't have social security number starting with 9. So I'll just change that to an 8. So once you've made the corrections, then you hit the next button again. It checks. Didn't find any problems that time, so it moved on. And basically you go through clicking next. It's going to jump through and check different areas in here. Up at the top of the page here, you have your the subtotals for each of these columns. So that's very handy for balancing to your 941 forms to make sure you have the correct amounts, so you don't have to add up the employees. So we'll go through and click next through these. Once it's done checking all of those, we get this window. It gives you information about paying Atrix to submit the forms for you. So it's $199 per employee. If you want more information, I think you can click here to enroll. Yeah, and you can start setting up information, fill out your company info, and I think it'll eventually ask you for credit card information as well. So I'm just going to tell it next. And then here it gives you the options for how you want to print. So this is where you can see specifically what it does for the complete e-filing service. So it'll print and mail. It will have electronic W-2 copies for your employees. So if they lose one, they can go out to a website and download and reprint their own W-2s. I know a lot of clients that they spend the first quarter of their year just reprinting W-2s for people. It files your W-2s for the federal and the state, and it has the EW-2s. But if you're not going with that option, you can pick your other options here. As you can see, you can choose to print and not do any of the e-filing options, and it will then not cost you anything. So you can still do it for free. But the forms that it requires, one of the handouts here is a document from Sage outlining exactly which forms you need for each of the versions on your W-2s. So you can purchase those from the Sage Checks and Forms website. Like this is the W-2 4-up blank, because basically it is all blank on the front of the form, and then it may have writing on the back, and it's basically perforated. So these are the forms that you would have to use. If you purchase the 2-part forms from your local office supply store that you may have been used to using with Sage in the past, those ones will not work with printing through Atrix, so you would have to basically return those, or basically you won't be able to use them unless you like get out a typewriter and start typing them up manually. So make sure you refer back to that form that we attached to make sure you have the correct forms for printing all of your 1099s and W-2s. So for here, I'm just going to pick my employee and my employer copy. Tell it next. It has one last time where it tries to tell you about the benefits for the complete. You can click on these Learn Mores to go to their website. Ask you if you want a divider sheet in between the different types of forms, the different copies. We'll tell it no. And then it gives you a summary here of the forms that you're going to use. So now it goes and presents you with a copy of, this is basically what it's going to look like when it prints out onto the form. So it's a little different than the old way Sage used to do it. It actually prints all of the lines and labels and everything for you. That's why the form is blank. But it then also has the benefit of lining up and looking really nice. You don't have to spend all that time fighting trying to make it line up properly. It just kind of lines up and matches. So you could go through here and go through the pages and look things over here if you want. Otherwise, you can move on to printing the form. It's going to tell you what type of paper. So the 4-part perforated W2 paper. So make sure you use the right ones. And then from here, it lets you choose your printer and how many copies that you'd want to print. Now, if this is the first time that you're printing an Atrix form to your printer, you would want to go through this page alignment. So even though it is a blank on the front, there is still specific positions on the form that your data should be and where the boxes should be. So since every printer pulls paper slightly different, it's important to make sure that you pull, that you do this page alignment to make sure that everything's printing in the proper position. And basically what you do is you print an alignment form and a test page. The alignment form is going to give you instructions for what you're doing. The test page will basically be a page with some markers on it where you will measure how far away from the edge of the page those markers are. And then if they are not the correct distance from the edge of the page, then you would come in here and use these arrows to kind of shift over. And you can see exactly how many inches here down at the bottom. So you'd go through, and once you get those, you can keep printing test pages until you have it right. But then once you have it right, you tell it done, and then you can print your forms. So when you go to print, it basically prints out the sheets, and then, and I'm printing mine to PDF. So then after you are done printing, you can basically move on to the next step. It loads the next form, and then you go through the same process of hitting print again, and you hit next. So it's giving me warnings here because I didn't actually print this form. And then it's actually, the last one is for plain paper, for printing the employee notice that's normally on the back of the forms. So once you're all done printing, then it goes and shows you a summary here of what you've printed, gives you the option to reprint them, to correct any that you may have already printed. So it would take you back to that first screen where you can put in adjustments, and then you could go through this process to print again, or you could go through and do a start over and basically start from scratch and go through the whole process again. So that is basically the W-2 printing. So next thing we will take a look at is the 1099 printing. Again, this is under Reports in the Accounts Payable module. And the Form 1099 e-filing and reporting. So here at the top, you tell it that it's new. You pick your form type, miscellaneous. You put in your minimum year-to-date amount. And then you can pick your 1099 calendar year that you want to use. I'm using some old demo data here, so it's 2014, but we'll just go with that. It's basically the same process. I guess the first thing we should talk about is reconciling your 1099 amounts. The best way is if you print your payment history report. You can then run that for your entire year. And you can tell it to group by your vendor number. And then you can tell it to print 1099 vendors only. And so that report will then show you for each vendor how much you have paid them. So in case somebody may have accidentally not marked an invoice as being applicable to 1099s, this gives you an opportunity to just see blanket what you have paid them. If there's any discrepancies, you can research those, and then once you've determined what the correct amounts are, if there are any differences, you can go to vendor maintenance, pull up that 1099 vendor on the additional tab. In the bottom right, we have 1099 history. And there you can see the individual forms, and you can come in here and adjust the amounts that would show on your 1099s. So once you have that all reconciled and you're comfortable that your amounts are correct, then we come in here to the printing, put in your pick your year and your minimum year to date, and then we accept. I'm just going to basically go through a process very similar to the process we saw with the W-2s, where we'll have a wizard that will ask us questions about our company, and then we will have the opportunity to adjust and change amounts. So I don't want to test. I'll tell it I want to start processing. Have my federal ID number, my company information. I'm filing for my company. Any state information. Anybody receiving electronically. Is this my final return? Do I want to truncate the Social Security number? How do I want to print ID numbers using a single 1099 data? So then it'll build all the information for the vendors. So you can see it looks very similar to the W-2 forms we looked at. So you can come through here on the left-hand side and adjust any vendor information. And over on the right-hand side, we have all the different boxes for the 1099 form. And we can hit next to jump through all the verification steps. Again, they have a similar service for 1099s where they will print and mail them all out for you for $1.99 per recipient. So I'm going to tell it I just want to print my payer copies. One last time information about the complete options for you. No, I don't want to include divider sheets. Okay, and then it shows us here what our 1099s will look like. And then again, like we looked at in the other form, we hit print final, and then we can go through and do a page alignment, and then we can print the forms. And that document that talked about which W-2 forms you need to purchase, it also talks about the 1099 forms that you would buy. So make sure you refer back to that, and that has links to each of the different forms that you will need. And then once you're done, it takes you through here and shows you information about what you've actually printed, and we can close. Once you're done printing your 1099s, it's going to ask you um, if you want to advance the next 1099 calendar year. That's basically just going to control what year it defaults to in vendor maintenance or in when you're running your 1099s. So if you're really done and you're not going to print anymore, then definitely tell it yes. If you think you might still be working on the 2016 1099s, then you might not want to run it yet, so you would tell it no. So I'll go ahead and just tell it no here for me. So that's basically how you go through and do the W-2 1099 printing. Oh yeah, one more form I want to show you for payroll. I want to show you the 941 form because it looks different than how the W-2s and 1099s look. So I want to let you see what that type of report would be. Basically, instead of presenting you with a big grid for you to go and adjust information, it will basically show you the form, how it will look, and it has the different fields highlighted in blue that you can click on and adjust. And then it highlights in red any fields that you still need to fill out. And you can use the arrows up here to switch between the pages. So it's a much different feel, but it's a very easy system. As you click and adjust things, it will actually change amounts and totals on the reports. So, and as you hover over different fields, it kind of gives you an explanation of them. So it really makes it much easier to fill out a lot of these forms. And I think these are the way most of the different tax forms will appear in the federal e-filing. So I would have the options to save if I wanted to save this and come back to it later, but I'm just going to tell it no, that I don't want to save it. So the last thing on the handout is some links to where you can find out some more information. The first one there, the Sage City Year-End Center, is a really great resource for you when you are finding information or when you have questions about the year-end. The link takes you to this first page where it has several links for different government websites on the right-hand side, so you can find those. And you can also select which software you're interested in. Once you're in the Sage 100 software, you have different areas, installation, tax updates. You can go and view articles and basically download those payroll tax table updates. You can come here and basically check to see when they're released from Sage. Down here at the bottom, it has a year-end checklist. Um, really great resource, walks you through basically all the steps and possibly more than what we've gone through here today, talking about different reports. You can click on these individual reports and get more information about them. Um, so really a treasure trove of information for you as you're walking through your year-end process. So definitely refer back to this um, as year-end comes around. Um, so now we'll go ahead and look at some questions and go back over any questions that people may have had. So if there's anything that maybe we didn't cover that you had questions about, go ahead now and type those questions in, and I'll start going through some of the questions that we may have had entered while I was talking and see if I can't answer those. So give me 1 minute while I look over that list.
And you can also use the raise your hand feature, and I can unmute your line if you'd like to ask your question live.
So Marisol had a question about how it works with the W-2 printing when you have two states. She said last year they had issues with the gross wages coming up as double amounts on Social Security numbers. I haven't had experience with that. I have several clients who have employees that work in multiple states and employees across or employees in several different states, and they haven't had any issues with it, so I don't know exactly what issue you may have had. Um, but yeah, we have to review that. And also, Matrix does have a support phone number where you're able to contact them directly and get support when you're having issues uh, with the W-2 printing or the 1099. So I will try to find that in my notes uh, where I used that previously, and make sure when Leanne sends out the email later with this recording that that phone number will be included as well.
Oh, there's another question in the queue, Ryan.
So Gail had a question, said, last year when I closed my payroll, my terminated employees didn't delete out of the 2016 payroll module. Is there an additional step I should do? I haven't heard of terminated employees not deleting when you do year-end processing. Um, Now I know if you don't mark them as actually as terminated, but just inactive employees will still stay. So I don't know if that could possibly be what happened. But I haven't run across that before. So yeah, I would have to look at that and run tests and stuff to try to figure out what's happening there. Because no, the terminated people should absolutely be removed from your list of employees when you do year-end processing.
Okay, I'm not seeing any additional raised hands or questions coming through. So we may be at a wrap. Unless anybody wants to hit that little hand real quick and raise their hand. Let's see, I think we're probably close to done. So Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us, and please reach out if questions do come up. You get up and walk away from your desk and say, hey, wait a minute, just let us know. Also, please let us know if there are other topics we can cover in the future other than year-end or period-end processing. We are hosting one next week on costing if you have any interest in that. And again, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.